had been driving by and I kept noticing this Polar Pop styrofoam cup that was just somehow hanging on a creosote limb. And I pretty much noticed that for about 3 months. And I was really amazed because if you know anything about the desert up here, it gets super windy and we have storms and monsoons.
Right.
And I just found it crazy that this Polar Pop cup was stuck on this creosote limb by the road.
This is the Desert Lady Diaries podcast, 30-minute conversations with women who have found their home in the Mojave Desert. I'm Dawn Davis, and this is episode 121. Find out more about the podcast at desertladydiaries.com or engage with guests, listeners, and me on Facebook and Instagram at Desert Lady Diaries.
Mary Addison Hackett is an artist, first trained as a painter, whose practice includes photography, video, and other time-based projects. She has a diaristic practice and makes work that examines mundane aspects of contemporary and domestic life. Her work has been shown widely in the U.S. and abroad in over 100 exhibitions since the early 90s. Born and raised in the South, Hackett lived and worked respectively in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Nashville for 3 decades prior to moving to Joshua Tree. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
So tell me, what was your first experience with desert?
My first experience with a desert was probably when I was around 7 years old. We were living in Nashville, and my parents decided to do the Great American Road Trip out west. Oh. So in the summertime, we took the first of 3 vacations to the Grand Canyon. And it was a road trip, and we stopped at basically all the kind of natural attractions and the tourist attractions. That would probably be the Painted Desert, the Sonoran Desert, and I think the Chihuahuan Desert. So we hit White Sands, Petrified Forest, Tucson, went down into Mexico a little bit.
Wow.
Yeah, so three summers in a row.
And how old were you when you started doing that?
7.
7, okay. Yeah. So by the time you were done, you were 10.
Yeah.
And do you remember at that time any impressions you had of the desert?
Oh, definitely. And because my mother had saved every single thing in the house, there was plenty of proof of those trips. So, yeah, it was a really great experience, actually, kind of thinking back about that and just kind of being exposed to nature, even though it was a car trip. But
well, and much different nature from where you were, because you grew up did you grow up in Nashville?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, so it was not as green and lush.
Yeah, just the different cultural aspects of making that trip, and particularly the Grand Canyon and the meteor craters. And
in those moments, did you ever have a thought like, wow, this is a really cool place, I might want to live here someday?
Not at that age. When I got older, my mother wanted me to go to college out west because she loved it so much. And I think from what I remember, we almost moved to Tucson for a little bit because for health reasons for my dad. But no, at that age, it was just more of this wonderful experience of a road trip.
Did you ever have that experience of going back to school after everybody's summer and talk about your vacations?
No, I don't remember that so much. When I was a kid, I had cameras, and so it's like I have a lot of documentation of those trips that I took. Yeah. And also that my parents took.
That's cool.
And I definitely remember being at, like, we stayed at the El Tovar Hotel at the Grand Canyon, and my parents were very supportive of the arts, and we got to know this artist there who was working there, and so I remember it as more of a cultural experience.
Right, exactly. Yeah, kind of mixed with nature, because you can't get away from how different the landscape is there and everything. That's really cool. Yeah. So at what point did you discover the Mojave Desert?
Fast forward to I was out of graduate school and living in Chicago, and I was working in post-production, and we had an opportunity to work with the director out in Santa Monica, so came out to Santa Monica, and I guess I had some downtime, so came out to Joshua Tree.
Did someone recommend that, or did you just kind of stumble upon it?
Yeah, I'm not really sure. It was 1998, so I just remember being out there for that. And then I don't really remember Actually, I don't remember that much about the 1998 visit. Then I got married in Palm Springs, and we would occasionally tromp around Joshua Tree from LA, and those I do remember. And I remember coming out to 29 Palms as kind of a getaway and staying at the 29 Palms Inn. And I remember taking a hot shower at the little store down in the village.
Oh.
They offer
Okay.
coin showers.
Yeah, here at Coyote Corner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm good for like 3 days camping
Yeah.
without anything, but then after like 3 days, I need a hot shower and a
Yeah.
cup of coffee. So that's what I remember from those trips.
So what was it that sparked you coming here and deciding to move?
I was back in Nashville after having lived in Los Angeles, and the Nashville move was supposed to be temporary. And then about at year 5, I roughly think that might have been the 2016 election. And politically, I just started feeling out of sorts with being in a red state, to be honest. And my main peer group, or so it felt at the time, was in LA and back in California. And I had a really wonderful experience from having lived in Los Angeles and was still communicating with my friends. And it just felt like a good time to make that move. I had some friends who were doing the LA JT cabin thing, and I decided within like maybe 3 months of the election to start doing some recon. And so at first I was thinking maybe I'd just find a little cabin, and that kind of turned into a more permanent kind of looking.
Right.
So yeah, within 6 months I was living here.
So did you know people that actually lived here in that time that you were visiting with the folks that had the cabins, or?
I did not. I did
Okay.
not know a soul here. I had a friend who lived in LA who had a cabin here. She was the only person who I actually knew who was semi-resident here, and that was just she was coming out a lot because she had just purchased her cabin, I
Oh,
think.
gotcha.
Or a couple of years maybe. And then I knew somebody down in Palm Springs who was also from Nashville, so that was a little bit of a boots on the ground. Both of those people let me stay at their place when I did my cross-country recon mission, and so I had a place to kind of land.
Yeah.
And I did all my research, so long distance, for the place that I was going to eventually get.
Oh, okay.
And so I found a realtor long distance, and I met him in person. He was great. He was kind of like having eyes and would send videos and
Great.
yeah.
Yeah. So then the process of packing up and making the actual move and getting settled in, how long did that take? But by the time you had already like closed on the house.
I did that all by myself, and I probably had a very unique situation, so it took me about 6 months. I was living in my childhood home and had 3 generations of things to go through.
Wow.
So it took over 5 years, and then the last 6 months I got some assistance on that. But in general, having packed up and moved a house before, I kind of knew how long it would take to pack things and get it. So once I kind of got the excess out, it's not something I enjoy doing at
right.
all. But I'm glad I know a couple of different ways to do it now.
I got spoiled. I had one move, and I'm sure this isn't even, people don't even see this anymore, especially in the position I was in. I was working for a bank in New Jersey, and I was being moved to Charlotte. I had gone down to interview for the job, and then they said, well, if we hire you, we're going to give you closing costs on a house here and your house wherever you are if you have one, and we're going to send people to your house to pack your things and move. Just that one experience of having people just come in your house like a whirlwind and pack up all your stuff, throw it in a truck, and drive away. It was like, ooh, that's too easy.
Yeah, that was my move from Chicago to LA was like that.
Yeah.
Completely. And then my move to Nashville, less so, but still like with a moving truck. And then my move here was definitely on a little bit more budget conscious.
So when you landed here and you get settled in your place, you don't really know anybody except your pal down in Palm Springs and your person coming out intermittently from LA. So what kind of things did you do to meet people?
Well, it's funny because I think I've been here like 2 weeks, and I still work with a gallerist in Atlanta, and her name's Marcia Wood, and Marcia texted me and said, you have to get over to the Sunfair Dry Lake Bed right now because there's a UFO roadshow thing going on, and it was something that was in conjunction with the High Desert Test Sites.
Oh, cool.
Who I was already familiar with Andrea's work in the High Desert Test Sites. Mm-hmm. It was like, I don't know, 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock when she texted me. So I just got dressed, got in the car, headed over there, and again, by myself, didn't know anybody. Mm-hmm. Introduced myself to the artist who, by connection, friend of a friend's, and to, I think it was this organization called Dash. I might be wrong on that. So I hung out there for the evening and... Mm-hmm.
Met your people.
Yeah, really. It was a total trippy desert, right? Beautiful, amazingly beautiful desert experience with the, they scheduled it for sunset and stuff over there. Yeah, it was great. So that was my first one. And then from there, it was kind of like my friend Meg, who I stayed at their place in Yucca Valley. She was giving an artist talk at Artist Tea. And all this might be kind of out of order, actually, but so I got to Artist Tea because she was giving a lecture.
Okay.
So, again, kind of found a little bit of a tribe there. Mm-hmm. And when I had been doing the recon thing, the triennial was going on. So although I wasn't living here, it was in April when I came out, and Desert X as well. Mm-hmm. And so went to Boxo to see at least I think it was the opening of the triennial that night. Knew a couple of people or names that were in there. So when I moved here, that was, I had an affinity towards the work that Bernard was showing. And one of the things, my art is how I connect with the community. That's just the only thing that is consistent, and that is how it goes. But when I moved to Nashville from Los Angeles, I had a friend tell me, when you first land in a community, there's a dangerous thing of like, we wear so many hats as artists, and I do some arts writing, and I hadn't really done any curatorial at that point, but he was like, don't start art writing until you start showing. Once you get known as an arts writer, then people are going to look at you as an arts writer. And he was speaking from experience, and he's a wonderful artist. But it's true. I knew John as an arts writer before I knew him as an artist. But after I got established a little bit in Nashville, I started doing some arts writing for some of the alt weekly there and a couple of other publications, both locally and then an art scene out of New York. And so here, I hadn't really, when I moved here, I knew that I was going to be taking some time off for myself to explore and work differently than I had been working. My practice had been really intense in Nashville, and I wanted to be lighter. And so when I got here, I initially was like, I'll reconnect with my friend Sharon in New York and pitch a couple of articles or essays for her. And so I wrote a couple of essays for her blog called Two Coats of Paint, which primarily focuses, as the name might suggest, primarily on artists who paint.
But you did write an article about the triennial.
I did, because she was a contemporary artist, her jam, so it wasn't that far off. But so I wrote an article for Two Coats about the triennial, and then I think I did a couple of other articles that were Joshua Tree oriented, and then things happened, and I fell off on that because I just freelance and I just do it on kind of what I see that would fit in with her. And of course, I don't have the final decision on what they want to focus on, but we know each other well enough. And then I also was recommended for a freelance gig to do some filmmaking and editing for Milltree.
Oh, nice.
And so that put me in touch with the Arts Connection people. And so, it's been a very organic way of getting to know people here.
I think if you just, when you move to any new place, I think you just kind of follow your own likes and hope that you find like-minded people there to start establishing your community. It's funny that one of the first things that you would do is go to Artist Tea, and now basically you are producing that, for lack of a better term, right?
Kind of producing, directing it. But it's, you know, we have an advisory council to that degree. We're collaborative, but I'm kind of running the season.
Right. So for someone who's listening who is unfamiliar with Artist Tea, let's give them a picture of what that looks like.
For that. Artist Tea actually will start back on February 9th, and we run 10 sessions per season, and by season I mean like fall and spring. We meet at Cap Rock in Joshua Tree National Park on Sundays from 9 until 11, and the artists we invite are local, and we try to have a fairly well-rounded practice of diversity, both with medium and other definitions of diversity. So the artists will speak about their work, and they can either speak for an hour or they can plan an activity for the participants. And it's a beautiful setting, and it's work that people have some kind of connection with Joshua Tree or the high or even the low desert. We're kind of evolving with how we define what connection is. We're sponsored by the National Park and the Joshua Tree National Park Council for the Arts. And then we have a couple of business sponsors, JT Outfitters and Cliffhanger Guides, that help us along too. So
great.
It's wonderful, and it was one of the first places. I'm kind of introverted, and it's a small enough group there, and it's a lecture, so it's kind of my cup of tea. No pun intended. Didn't even see that coming. I think it's a great place for people who are newcomers, especially who want. And it's not just the visual arts. We have writers and podcasters and chefs. We do have a really kind of unique program there.
Yeah.
So it's been great, and we're starting back up on Sunday.
I am hoping to be there at least for an hour because I like Ben and I like his work, so I want to see what he's got up his sleeve.
Yeah.
So you had mentioned in the course of moving here that you were looking to kind of change up and relax your practice, as it were, and I only know from our personal interaction that you've kind of set the painting aside. I
can't really say that because that's like the death kiss, the kiss of death. I'm still painting. I just, when I was in Nashville and LA before for a couple of decades or more, I was working about 10 hours a day in the studio.
Wow. And
if I wasn't teaching, I was working in the studio. And so just working that prolifically, I had a lot of work. And I always had shows scheduled, and it was really, I say lucky, but, you work hard and you get shows. And so that was just my MO. And I don't want to spend a lot of time on this at all because it's still a little kind of a personal issue for me. I had a storage unit in LA, and I just kind of decided that I could not or did not want to do that anymore. And I was living in Nashville and I had this storage unit in LA full of artwork. I let go of some pieces, and that was hard. It was kind of like I made the call that the few would represent the many. And then I vowed never to do that again.
So is that why
reasons.
You're doing more video work?
Yeah, and I started working a little bit more ephemerally while I was still in Nashville because I felt like I did a lot of work in Nashville, and I felt that I had maybe mined the territory that I was supposed to be mining, and it was kind of like, if you've ever seen the H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, I was kind of living in that environment, and at the time I thought I needed to get out of that because it was just intense. So I started going back to previous ways of working, which were with video, and I had been taking a lot of photographs when I was there too, just kind of documenting because I knew once I left that would be gone. The diaristic part of my practice has been there for all my life. It just has taken different forms. So once I made that decision, I decided to lighten up on the painting practice because I didn't want to work with objects so much anymore.
So do you think that was a decision that you made before you came to the desert, that that's what was going to happen? Or do you feel like landing here in the desert, there was an effect on you?
It was a decision I made actually back in the early 90s when I went to grad school. That was when I first stopped painting, or stopped painting the first time. And I started working with a very ephemeral practice then. And basically I ended up using video and photos to document these actions or performances or situations. And that turned into just really kind of a different direction. So that's when the stylistic practice really took over in terms of day-to-day life. And then in Nashville, when I got there, it reared its head again. And as soon as I landed in the desert, I knew that I was going to be not working as, quote, a studio artist so much, so that even if I was painting, I didn't want to, at that time, be confined to a white cube studio space. I wanted to get out, because anyone who works in the studio knows it can be very intensive, and you know that's your life, kind of. So once I landed, that was all accurate. But no, I've been painting since I've been here. I just don't really talk about it that much. I just kind of quietly post them on my website.
Right. Yeah. Or there was, I think I saw there was, maybe even been 6 months or more ago, maybe of the spring and summer, you took your easel to, like, were you on Border?
Oh, yes.
Border Road or Street, whatever it is. We only call it Border here. It's a two-lane road, if you will.
Yeah, I was on Border. I had been driving by and I kept noticing this Polar Pop styrofoam cup that was just somehow hanging on a creosote limb. And I pretty much noticed that for about 3 months. And I was really amazed, because if you know anything about the desert up here, it gets super windy and we have storms and monsoons.
Right.
And I just found it crazy that this Polar Pop cup was stuck on this creosote limb by the road. So I started documenting it with photos, and then one day I was like, oh, I'm going to just paint that, you know. And so I ventured over and set up my easel. And it's hard to explain this, but that I'm not making fun of that practice, plein air painting, but I kind of take on different personas when I work.
Well, that's interesting.
And that's a persona that I take on. So I don't want to say it's like a private performance, but I wasn't trained as that kind of painter.
Right.
But I kind of embrace it for its kind of democratic way of working. Yeah. So, and then...
Keeps it interesting.
Yeah, and then I think when they put cables or something in up there, somebody took the cup away. So it didn't actually come down on its own.
Right, it was actually removed.
It was removed, yeah.
Wow.
So...
Oh my gosh.
But yeah, it got documented both in film and painting.
What do you think the biggest change in your life has been since moving to the desert? Or one of the biggest? Because sometimes there are more than one.
You know, I've always been very conscientious as a person and as a human on this earth. Part of lightening up on the painting practice was I wanted to have a lighter footprint as an artist and as a person. I visit the landfill instead of having garbage pickup, and I don't have a television anymore. That's because I'm kind of too lazy to figure out the cable hook. Like I just,
Right.
Someone chopped it, and I need to get a Home Depot and buy the little coaxial thing. 3 years later, and you know. But I mean, I binge watch stuff on Netflix, so it's not like I'm without
Right.
you know, a connection. But again, one of the things that I used to do would be like one day a week I would treat myself to just literally sitting down, and you get kind of dialed into a television show.
Yeah.
And it would just be so easy to sit down and turn on the television and watch Sunday night television. So I don't have that, and it's really, sometimes I'm just too tired to make that decision. So I don't even I end up just reading or staying in the studio. And I've always lived within about 2 miles of Whole Foods or a Starbucks. So I don't just automatically pick up hot food at the hot bar.
Because now you're about 10 miles from even a market, right?
Yeah, I forgot what the mileage is, but it's 20 minutes. And an hour if I want to go to see an art film or go to Trader Joe's or Whole Foods. So my consumption has dropped off a lot. Unfortunately, it means kind of my cultural consumption has dropped off too, because I feel like I need a passport to get past the Morongo grade.
Right.
It's just like it's the gravitational pull. I just, I'm working on that. That's probably one of the hardest things is literally like getting out of our little basin, and it's mental. I mean, yeah, it's a drive.
Well, I don't know. When I first moved, I think probably within the first 18 months, I could count on one hand the number of times that I'd been down the hill, as we call it.
Oh, yeah. It took me 3 months to, I think, go to Trader Joe's. And I moved here originally because I wanted to get back to LA, and I really thought that I would just be doing weekends in LA all the time. And then I think I knew, though, after living in suburban Nashville and kind of being able to, I hate to say this, but check out a little bit. Because you know, when you do move away from a major arts community that's a big city, and I'm not speaking for everyone, but someone can correct me if I'm wrong. There's a little bit of like, oh, it's too far to go to the opening tonight. It's like you don't really, it's a little bit of an excuse rather than you kind of feel like you get a pass. But that comes with a lot of danger. Yeah, I mean, I've probably been to LA maybe 5 times in 3 years. I mean, maybe a little bit more, but I don't think so. And it's all been business stuff. It's never just like, oh, I think I'll just go to LA.
Just go to the Broad and spend the day, traipsing through the museum.
That kind of business, but but it does take some planning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, because there's time involved too. It's the commute and all that stuff. I mean, when I go in, I try and take the train. So, I'm planning my hour to the train station, or a little more than an hour, then your hour and a half ride in, and then getting from the train station. If you get on the metro, great. If you have to wait for a lift car, so it is a production, depending on where you're going. And it is really easy just to say, no, I'm staying here.
Yeah, I've got a dog as well, so
Right.
that adds, like, I can't really take the chance that something would happen and I wouldn't be able to get back in time. Those are just life things, and, it's a little bit different than having your airport be within 20 minutes of a cab ride, an affordable cab ride, I might add. So the desert challenges, the other things make up for that.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of those other things for you?
I'm a huge proponent of the night sky. It's like when you walk out your door, and this always sounds a little bit crazy because when you walk out your door anywhere, well, with the exception of the city, you're kind of there. Like there's nature right there, grass or whatever. And for some reason here it feels like it's just even way more immediate.
Yeah.
And I can't really kind of answer that. like why soil in Nashville didn't feel as close as soil in Joshua Tree, but yeah, there's just, and I'm rural, so I'm taking advantage of the rural life
right
now,
absolutely,
because I don't know that rural living is going to be forever in the cards.
Sure.
But that's why I wanted to do it now.
Well, and that's always something to think about, especially as we age. Being able to maintain, my brother was visiting here and he's like, wow, you really need a car to get around here.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do the bus, but again, it's that time thing of when is it going to come? How long is it going to take to wait for it? And et cetera. But yeah, as we age, I think that's always a consideration of how we're going to manage ourselves and our lives, figuring those things out when you get to that point in life.
Yeah, there's some practical issues.
Well, I want to thank you very much for coming and talking with me today. But before I let you go, it's the new sound of the podcast this year. And it's the sound of shaking up the numbers for the Diary Unlocked portion of the episode. So if you would select randomly 2 chips with numbers on them.
Oops,
Uh-oh, you took extra.
there we go.
And answers to these questions will be available to the Patreon supporters of the podcast. If you are not currently a Patreon supporter, you can go to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and sign up to be a patron. The first question that Mary Addison will answer is, what is a closely held belief you haven't questioned lately?
A closely held belief that I
You
have not
questioned lately. And then we go to,
Can I get
what
another?
gets you out of bed in the morning? The next question will be, what or who inspires you? And the last question will be, how do you cope with stress?
Okay, those
So
are a
if
lot
you-
for me to remember.
Yeah.
So,
I'll repeat them when we
yeah,
come back.
so-
Again, if you want to hear Mary Addison's answers to those questions, just go out to desertladydiaries.com, click on the support page, and select the Patreon option. Thanks again for coming today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dawn, for having me.
You're welcome.
I've got shout outs this week to Nolina B for following on Facebook. Thank you, Nolina. And for Lindsay R for signing up for the weekly newsletter. And Katie, who came into Soul Connection on Joshua Tree's Second Saturdays. It was great to meet you. This podcast is being released on February 11th, 2020. And if you're in the Joshua Tree area or environs and are still interested in signing up for the podcasting basics class that I'll be leading at Copper Mountain College for their community education classes, you have until February 28th, which is actually the day before it starts, to sign up. But I wouldn't wait that long. If you're interested, those dates again are Saturday mornings, February 29th, March 7th, 14th, and 21st. Each class is 90 minutes from 9 to 10:30 a.m., and the cost is $140. Visit www.cmccd.edu and then go to their Prospective Students tab and click on Community Education and click on the catalog cover. If you've been listening to this podcast and you like what you hear, I would be ever grateful if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or whatever platform you're listening from. Even if you're listening on SoundCloud or YouTube, clicking on the heart icon to say you like it or making a comment is just as good as leaving a review. So thank you so much for doing that. And if you're a new listener, you may not know that I also have a shop in downtown Joshua Tree called Soul Connection. It's located in the Shops at Zanny's, which is behind Zandalion's Boutique, 61877 29 Palms Highway, just east of Art Queen and Sun Alley Shops. The shop is now open expanded hours, Thursdays from noon to 5, Fridays and Saturdays from 10 to 5, and Sundays from 11 to 5. Art, books, and music created by people who live here, greeting cards, T-shirts, and many other fun things. I hope you'll stop by and say hi. Until next time, thanks so much for listening.